Welcome to SportsLit. I'm Neil Acharya.
And I am Nathan Sager.
Like Charles Marlowe sailing down the Congo in Heart of Darkness, or more closely, Benjamin L. Willard navigating the rivers of Vietnam in Apocalypse Now, Rich Cohen descends into madness on the highways of Connecticut. Only the neutralization of a renegade colonel isn't what drives him mad. It's Pee-wee hockey. In Joseph Conrad's 1899 novel, the yarn is spun by the narrator on the banks of the Thames as daylight metaphorically gives way to night. For Cohen, it is behind plexiglass. The descent is broken down into months, which become chapters, chronicling a season. What starts out innocently in August 2018 becomes a character study. By April of the following year, he knows the game and himself, again, for the first time. The commercials will tell us we are hockey mad at the highest levels, but the real madness is more accurately attributed to minor hockey, where parents stake their existence on a child's chase of a dream that sometimes isn't even their own. Rich Cohen's book, Pee-wee's Confessions of a Hockey Parent, follows his son Micah's season with the 2018-19 AA Ridgefield Bears as they crisscross the northeastern U.S. from rink to rink, and as the season pushes forward, the parental politics elevate until it sucks the parent in, even though they thought it wouldn't happen. The subject is at arm's length away from Canada. The author is from Illinois, lives in Connecticut, and the focus is entirely on the U.S. system. And so we know we aren't the only crazy ones now. Nate, you first introduced me to Rich Cohen when you gave me his book Monsters about the 1985 Chicago Bears that won the Super Bowl in '86, and I have a confession to make.
You won a William Nylander jersey for your birthday. I knew it.
I didn't read it in its entirety.
Well, how far did you get?
The intro, but it was a very, very good intro, and I might have gotten a little further than that. And therefore, it's, just by reading that, it's no surprise Cohen's work has been published in The Atlantic, New Yorker, New York Times, and his multiple talents have also resulted in numerous acclaimed books, and as a role as a contributing editor at Rolling Stone, as well as a collaboration with Martin Scorsese on the HBO series Vinyl. I've got a story about that. Remind me to tell him. Nate, like Anthony Rizzo on Cohen's 2016 World Series Cubs, you are up next for your thoughts on this book and the author, who novelist and screenwriter Richard Price called one of the greatest social and cultural historians of post-war 20th century America.
Yeah, Neil, it was a call to action when news Rich Cohen had written a book about being a hockey parent came up during some pre-dawn doom scrolling. Finding out, Rich Cohen is a hockey guy is like a fastball in the wheelhouse that you have to try to hammer out onto Sheffield Avenue.
Of course, Nate, you would use a baseball metaphor to describe a hockey book.
Yeah, well, I had something in there about spin rate and weighted on base percentage before this compromised second draft, Neil.
Does this tie into the analytics of William Nylander? Sorry.
Yeah, I'm gonna get like an A patch on that jersey, and it's gonna be like analytics. Cohen really picks his topics based on themes that live in his head, in his soul. Like he's a deep dive guy, and it's kind of a refreshing throwback in his narrative nonfiction to a time when I think there was much less specialization in journalism. Maybe even if the last 5 years in North America have pointed up how we need to make expertise valued again. Cohen really draws in the readers. It calls to mind when I was young and I saw an explainer in the front of one of Mordecai Richler's novels that spoke to me about why his work, which drew on his experiences growing up in a working-class Jewish neighborhood in Montreal, had so much sway over a kid like me who grew up, out in the sticks across from a cow pasture. Richler reached the universal through the particular. He put you so deep into his world that you could see the commonality with yours. And, since it takes all kinds to, make the sports book genre what it is, the last thing that we were trying to, suggest here is that everyone who writes a sports book or, social history has to start out with that rooting interest. Like Jeff Pearlman, he goes where there's a great sports story, whether, it's a team in Dallas or Los Angeles or an NFL legend who came from a, small southern state. Now, there are days, when the internet and the noise gets too much, you want to propose, okay, everyone has to pick their 8 lanes and they have to stay in them. Should I really be the guy going off about this topic, or, should I be signal boosting someone who knows better?
Nate, are you VMing?
I think I am, yeah. Sorry, thanks for reeling me in. Cohen is great since the wit and level of observation in his books really just shows you how much he cared. I really liked his first book, Tough Jews. I enjoyed Sweet and Low, which is about, how his grandfather, I think, invented artificial sweetener, but Rich's immediate family got, cut out of, sharing in that sweet sugar fortune. Confession, I actually read all of Monsters before I gave it to you.
Nate, I am not surprised by that. Continue.
Yeah, as a native Chicagoan, Cohen has also written about his lifelong love of the Chicago Cubs and their curse, since he was invested to them being in that last generation of, Chicago kids who grew up when there was only daytime baseball at Wrigley Field. I think Rich was born in 1968, so that would have put him in like the same senior class as the fictional Ferris Bueller. I love that he's, pursued his passions. He has that one football book. He's got that one book about the major sports franchise that was/is cursed to never win the biggest prize. And he's got no need to go back and do a second.
Although you could check both those boxes by writing about your Minnesota Vikings.
Yeah, but then I can't write that book. Pee-wee's is an American complement to books that, I think express a well-founded, capital F, fear about the direction of youth hockey. We had the uniquely Canadian take on that from Sean Fitzgerald of The Athletic when he joined us in 2019 to discuss Before the Lights Go Out, which is a season inside a game on the brink. I think our great Canadian hand wring sort of centers on, youth hockey being too expensive and inaccessible to wide swaths of the population. And we wonder about, what's that going to do to Canada's position as the world's #1 producer of hockey talent. But Rich sort of centers it on the fact that hockey's become kind of like every childhood activity now, with this arms race aspect that puts pressure on the parents to get on this hamster wheel of forking out more and more for extras to, enhance their childhood's experience. Enjoyment may or may not enter into it. And then the parents get wired into thinking doing more of something is the only way to do it. You're a bad mom or dad if your child only does the thing, 4 to 6 months out of the year. But it's, proven that early sports specialization hurts long-term athlete development. Brian Burke talked about that with us last fall in season 4, episode 5, and arguably it also hurts social development because you don't get to meet as many people with as many different interests and skills. Now, hockey might not be the worst offender out of all the youth sports. It's just a uniquely obvious offender for, 3 main reasons. One is obviously the cost of owning skates and equipment and becoming a good skater. The second is the cost of renting, indoor ice as the climate crisis reduces the number of days we can skate outdoors. And a third is, the culture around the game. Skating rinks and culture. Hockey's, big hope is probably requiring less time on arena ice and including, more types of people, or else it'll kind of get nichier and nichier like most winter sports. So that fear, I think, is at the heart of Pee-wee's, that heart of darkness thing that you mentioned, Neil. And Cohen really places his son's season at the crest of a shift that he kind of calls a general decline in community. As America fades as a dream, it becomes every man for himself. But hockey's not an everyone for themselves sport. It's probably the most thoroughly team sport it is. That's why we love it. And one gets the sense that Cohen really came to see hockey as an ideal that was, apart from, that world of selfishness and self-dealing that he criticizes. It seemed to lend itself to, fostering community. But you can't control who wants to be part of it, right? I mean, he lays out how, all the Karens and Kevins out in the suburbs are, increasingly less prone to assign their outsized American ambitions to their children playing baseball, basketball, or football, even if the sports TV exposure suggests otherwise. I wrote this before it was announced the NHL is going to be back on ESPN. For instance, participation in full-side football has declined over 10% in the U.S. just within the last decade. And it's not just like, the blue states that are, giving it up. It's down in 48 of the 50 U.S. states. So, people are happening on this game that seems made for their, medium-sized, children, to paraphrase the, 80s hockey movie Youngblood. We sort of asked Cohen about it, but that does seem like a theme in a book whose high point when he pulls the "you never played the game" card out on one of the coaches who was a parent. and it's obviously the ultimate journalistic irony for a writer to pull the "you never played the game" card, even when he's got a valid reason to do it. So there's a lot of value for us in having this perspective about youth hockey in the States. Up here in Canada, I think we only really get the only American angle we get on it. We kind of get the chest thumping. Look at how many American kids went in the first round of the NHL draft. Look at who won the World Juniors. And then we sort of, come back with our trademark Canadian, shut down sarcasm. Yeah, but free healthcare, eh? So grateful Rich Cohen can join us to talk about Pee Wee's Confessions of a Hockey Parent from Farrar, Strauss, and Giroux. And no, that's not a line for the Flyers.
Do you want to share that quick thing about your Vikings masks, or?
Yes. So my mom gave me a 3-pack of Minnesota Vikings masks at Christmas. She still does stockings for us, even though her youngest child is 36 years old. And I actually found that they really worked as well as a sleep mask, like pulling them up over my eyes. And I was just like, I think I'm going to wear them like this when the defense is on the field next year.
Well, it's funny because Rich is a big Bears fan like myself, and we might have to ask him about the possibility of actually landing a bona fide quarterback in Russell Wilson. So we'll see if we get to that, and we will in a second. Thanks, Nate. Remember, you can purchase this book and any others that are a subject of one of our episodes by going to our website, www.sportslit.ca, and at some point you will see Nate's segues on there as well. So up next, Rich Cohen to talk about Pee Wee's Confessions of a Hockey Parent. Well, we're back on SportsLit, and we're very excited to have Rich Cohen join us. I know Nate is a Vikings fan, so you're outnumbered today, Nate. 2 Bears fans, 1 Vikings fan.
I'm used to it.
Rich, I want to ask you, I realized that in the episodes, the 35 or so we've done so far, sometimes I jump past, the most basic question, which I think the average listener would probably want to know. So I'm going to give you a softball right off the top, which most people have probably asked you when they've interviewed you about any book, and that is, what has the reaction been so far, in this case, to the candid exploration of Pee Wee hockey, given, in your case, your wide breadth of what you've written over, you've written about rock and roll, you've obviously written about various different sports and music and so on. So what has the reaction been to a book about Pee Wee hockey?
Well, the reaction's been very personal, because it's a super personal thing, and it turns out, as I was hoping, I just wrote about my own experience, but my experience is shared by so many other people who are just hockey parents, sports parents in general. And, I just get I become like a deer. I always thought you could make $1 million if you became a psychiatrist who worked just with hockey parents. So I've kind of become that. I'm sort of the counselor for hockey parents, and I get a lot of stories of way worse than anything I've experienced, or way crazier. And I don't even get to charge by the hour.
Yeah, and what's sort of been the reaction? I mean, I think back to when I was, a small town sports reporter and getting a bit key piece of advice. Remember, you have to live in this town before you write.
Yeah.
When you write critically, what's kind of been the reaction where you live?
I mean, that's just definitely something. But I've written about my family and everything, so I kind of have experience with it, and it's sort of always risky. The reaction that I've heard of has been great. It's been covered in the local paper, the local magazine. I did an event at our local library. There were tons of people there, very supportive. Other parents that my kid played with had the same experience. Now, probably a few people aren't so happy, but I haven't heard from them. So I would say the reaction is great, but I'm sure it's not completely thorough. And also, normally you talk to people at the rink, but because of the COVID, which, is crazy thing that never in a million years that I think that this would happen. I haven't really seen people as much, and I don't know what it's like for you guys, but the kids jump around from program to program, and these teams don't stay together. It's like they're a bunch of free agents on a professional team, and they go shopping for the best program. So my son doesn't play in the same organization anymore, and very few of the kids that he played with are in the same organization. They're scattered all around Connecticut.
Yeah, true. And there was I think a good book written up here a few years ago called Selling the Dream, Ken Campbell and Jim Parcells, that described that, just like people come and go. Now, your sports books have sort of taken on the big themes, the Cubs curse, the 1985 Bears and the wild heart of football. Why did you sort of see a big idea that attached to your son's youth hockey team?
Well, I'm always interested in writing about sports because I feel like I'm just a generalist as a writer. And first of all, I want to write about things that I really feel passionate about. So the Bears, the Cubs who made me cry in 1984, and the Bears who saved my life in 1985 from the Cubs. And and then I played hockey growing up, and that was a sport I knew better and cared more intensely about than any other sport. And I felt myself caring about my son's hockey in a way that I hadn't cared about anything since my own hockey. I mean, I used to feel when I played for about an hour before the game, I'd start to feel like I was going to throw up. I'd get nauseous. And that didn't go away until the game started. And I would feel that way. I still feel that way before my own kid's games. He doesn't feel that way, but I do. And so when something actually makes you sick, you know that it's got to be a good subject. And I also felt that it was kind of the flip side of my book about the Chicago Bears, which was about the 85 Bears, but also about the history of the NFL, because, it's very clear that one was called Monsters, one was called Pee-wees, and there was some connection to that. Because the thing about kids playing, we're talking about bantams here in the United States, 12 and 13-year-olds or 11 and 12-year-olds, is that there's nothing more pure. And these kids are playing it, if they're playing it well, they're playing it because they love it. And mostly the parents just get in the way of that, if anything. So I felt like that's the purest form of sport. And the moment that I knew that it was a great subject for me was a few years ago when they played a tournament here in Can-Am tournament in Lake Placid, New York, where the Miracle on Ice team beat the Russians and then won the gold medal, which was such a huge thing for American hockey. And they play, it's like almost like a fantasy park, and the kids really believe that they're like in the Olympics. And this was when he was a little kid, and they made it to the bronze medal game. They weren't even very good, and they lost in a close game. And I'm waiting because my thoughts are mostly, I want to get on the road, man. It's like a 5-hour drive. It's Sunday afternoon. It looks like it's going to snow. And they're not coming out of the locker room. And after like 45 minutes, I stick my head in there to see what's going on. And all these kids are sitting completely still dressed in their uniforms, just weeping. And I'm like, it's so great to care about something so unimportant so much that it makes you cry, that this is just a great subject to explore more deeply.
Rich, I want to ask you about your first experiences with hockey, because it's in the book and it's very well written, and like the whole book is. It's very interesting how you had the Canadian coach, and he seems to be from this far off land, and he kind of writes which direction you have to go by putting an X on one of your gloves. I think you were left wing.
Yeah.
And I wanted to ask you about the rink where the tent blew off the top. I want to ask you about your first experiences playing hockey and being a fan of hockey, because you couldn't watch it on TV because Wirt's family had blacked out the games.
Yeah. Well, first of all, the only times I saw pro players was when we went to Chicago Stadium, which was like an adult portion of pro hockey. I mean, it was very intense. The Blackhawks were a very good team then, and they couldn't get past the Canadians. That was their whole problem. This was like in the mid to late 70s, but they were a team with Stan Mikita and Dennis Hull and, Keith Magnuson and Tony Esposito. And for us, there was nothing on TV. We had the 3 channels and the UHF. There was nothing going on in the winter. And my brother was playing hockey. My brother's 5 years older than me. So it was so cold where I grew up. Outside of Chicago, my parents would just drop us both at the rink to spend the entire day. So basically, I just went because there was nothing else to do. And this was a rink called the Deerfield Bubble. The Bubble actually still exists. They sold it to a college in Minnesota, I think, uses that same bubble now. And it was so cold, and basically I got up on skates because of my brother and his friends, and I had a lot of trouble getting going, probably because the skates were like 4 sizes too big, And I couldn't get off my ankles, and my brother knew that I had this fear of the Zamboni, that I was convinced that the Zamboni, that's how I was going to die. I was going to be run over by a Zamboni. And he knew the Zamboni driver, and he got him to come out and chase me with the Zamboni. And I was so scared that I went from like a kid who couldn't skate to the fastest kid anybody had ever seen. And that's when I got my first nickname, as they started calling me Rocket for Maurice Richard, but just because my name is Richard and because of that crazy sight of a kid running as fast away as he could from the Zamboni. And so for me, like, there was always the mix of hockey. Maybe that's why it made me nauseous. It was combined with my love of the game and my fear of death by Zamboni. And And then, it was the best way to play hockey because we would just sort of jump in. They would always be short. I'd always playing with kids older than me. And I had this coach as a squirt named Jim Freeberg, who you mentioned, who was Canadian. I found out later that he actually worked for Can-Am, and he'd come down he was trying to proselytize hockey. I mean, there just wasn't a lot of hockey being played at a very high level by kids. And I tried to make this travel team. I was the last kid cut the first year, and then I made it, and that was like a great lesson of persistence. And we would travel all around the upper Midwest and into Canada to find teams to play, and they played. The rink was originally outdoors. This was in Deerfield, right by the tollway on the campus of Trinity College in Deerfield. And it was really a flat, open, cold place. So parents pitched in, and they got this big bubble that you see over it, but it was like early in bubble technology. And my brother was playing, and there was like a windstorm, and the bubble was whipping back and forth, and actually it ripped off, which is like, can you imagine? It's like a vision of God, like suddenly, bam, you're out in the universe. And it blew away. And the parents got like a posse together and chased it because they paid $30,000 for the thing, and they caught up with it in Indiana, at which point it had been ripped to shreds. So then they bought this newer, better design bubble that was there for many years, but it was a really cold rink, and it was a huge home ice advantage, which is most of the team that played us, we were the Deerfield Falcons, or powerhouse. They just weren't thinking about winning. They were thinking about getting off the ice as quickly as possible because it was so cold.
So the first outdoor game was not at Wrigley Field. It was at
no. Well, in my little town where I grew up, where we moved, we didn't have travel hockey. We didn't play travel hockey there, but they have an outdoor rink that's still there, and in a very high-level house league, which is kind of an option that doesn't exist anymore for parents, which was a great thing because a lot of parents, they might be the best kid in the world, but the parents simply weren't going to. You couldn't convince the parents to get in the car and drive 4 hours to play hockey when there's a rink 2 minutes away. They play house league.
I'm glad you brought up that house league point because we want to ask you about that later. And you talked about just everything becoming so specialized that the house league has been gutted essentially. But I want to ask you just before about the book, and what I thought made this a uniquely American book about hockey. Is I don't think it would have been able to be written in Canada. I don't think an author here would have been willing to put in the names and examine the different things and the texts and present all that. I just don't think it would happen here. So I thought that was what made this book interesting to me, was that we usually read books here about hockey by Canadians, and this was someone writing about hockey. It was an American, entirely kind of about the American system. So I wanted to ask you about any kind of the way you presented this. Was there hesitation at all? Did you have to go through legal or anything like that to get these names in the book, especially when dealing with young players?
I changed all the names, and I disguised the details, and I had to do that with legal. And what I wrote's true. And in America, because of the First Amendment, you're allowed to write pretty much anything if it's true.
Right.
But I really try to focus not so much on the kids, other than in the games, and make it really about the parents, because really the kids' game here is great. The thing where you run into some trouble sometimes is with the parents, and it's just trouble you run into everything with parents and kids, because as I discovered, and I know it's true about myself, it's impossible to be objective about your own kid. And normally that's just loving your kid and caring about your kid, and that's fine, except when you're a parent coach, like a lot of them are here, it becomes either a little bit corrupt or a conflict of interest, or the appearance of a conflict of interest, which amounts to the same thing here, because people think that their kid's getting the shaft, and it ends up seeming very, very important. And or you have parents that, I would say there's two kinds of parents. There's the kind that think their kid's never done anything wrong, and then the kinds that think their kid's never done anything right. And those are both equally the problem, because as I've realized watching this, is your kid is probably somewhere in the middle. And they make these cuts of these teams that are all leveled, very, very hierarchical. But the truth is most of these kids, except for the few outliers on either end, are pretty close in ability. And they don't develop gradually. They develop in jumps, like physical jumps, which you really see as a parent, which is they couldn't do something and now they can. So the tryouts are just a snapshot that misses the bigger picture. And one thing I really missed that from when I was a kid is they basically kept our team together from age 6, until we went to high school. And so you felt you grew up and developed with these kids unless there was a real reason. But now, because the tryouts have become mini versions of the NFL Combine where they are measuring for certain particular isolatable, measurable skills, they miss kind of the big picture and they lose sort of the camaraderie of the team and they sort of, then it becomes all these different little machinations. And so that's a long way to answer your question of, yes, I had to go through legal, but yes, I try to change the names. And the only name that's really the same in the book is mine and my son.
Go ahead, Nate.
Yeah, and you have the phrases that earwormed into my brain from the book were, teach to the test and blame Malcolm Gladwell. And, to what extent was this about using youth hockey as a window into, just how priorities have, sort of got out of whack with the way the parents approach all, childhood activities?
Well, I'm 52 years old. I'm very much a millennial. I mean, not a millennial, a Generation X, not a millennial, a Generation X person. And I really think like a lot of the systems set up maybe 10 years before me, they had good intentions, but they had these horrible unintended side effects. And I grew up outside of Chicago, and then I was living in New York for a long time, and then I moved to Connecticut, and it was like this big change had happened. And I really focused on Malcolm Gladwell because I kept hearing him be quoted. And you realize one of the reasons why Malcolm Gladwell, Canadian, I believe, his book was such a big hit, in addition to being a really great writer and good insights and everything, he seemed to offer a kind of code or a kind of map for how to make your kid a great athlete. And people followed this. And there was two things. One is he said that, great NHL players tend to be born January, February, because that's when the cutoff is, and they're the oldest and the biggest. So they're the most developed, so they get the most attention. And immediately when I read that, I thought, oh, my God, that's true. That's got to be right. And that's why I wasn't a better hockey player, because I was born at the end of the summer. So it gave me immediate feeling of it wasn't my fault, But then I looked up Gretzky and Messier. They were born like January, February. I don't remember exactly. Then I started looking up other players, and they were born like Bobby Hull. I don't remember, born like in September. Like, it didn't make sense. It wasn't right. And then I thought, like, when I was a kid, the players I played with I wasn't the oldest. I was always the youngest. And that's what I thought made me better, which was trying to find a way to contribute to games where I was 3 years younger than some of those kids. And I know that Gretzky played with players that were much older than him. So that didn't make sense. And then you get the 10,000 hours thing, which is, he said, you have to do anything to master it, you have to do it for 10,000 hours. But he doesn't practice for 10,000 hours. I don't know how 10,000 hours long that is, but I could get out a calculator. It seems like a lot of time. And the thing that you realize is, one, you can do something for 10,000 hours and still suck at it, which he never mentions. And then two, the fact is, if you're doing something 10,000 hours, you don't know you're practicing. So it's like when we were kids, we would go in the weekend, they froze, it's like Canada probably, they froze a giant park in our town, big enough to have like 6 or 7 games, pickup hockey games going on at one time. And if we didn't have organized hockey, we'd be on the ice for 12 hours until our parents dragged us off. So that was 12 hours of practice. We never thought about it that way. We were playing. And then we'd come home, we'd go down to the basement and take slap shots or whatever, play floor hockey. That's probably another 4 hours, But now it's like focused on the practicing and the play, because they're trying to amass those 10,000 hours. And then you get in a situation where the hockey season for my son, it begins at the end of August and it goes until the end of April. That's like an NHL season. Then they have spring league, and then kids go to summer camp, which means you can't play any other sports. Now, I make my kid take, basically 6 weeks to 2 months off in the summer, because I think that the biggest talent you can have as a hockey player as a kid is loving the game. I mean, it doesn't really matter if you're a great player but you hate to go, because you won't go. You'll find ways not to go and find a way to quit. And you'll end up fighting with your mother or father a lot before you do it. So I always found that there were kids that played all year long. We'd go away for the summer. My son would play baseball. I have him play a lot of golf and swimming and all that. And then we come back, like the kids that stayed there all year, they're like the guy that you see, you left work at 6 o'clock and you came in at 10 the next morning and he'd been there all night and looked like crap. And that kid got all this extra time, but he was just, completely worn out, done with hockey. The season hasn't even started, and he just wants to go home and go to sleep. And I always thought the kids that took time off actually got a jump. They actually did better. So it's kind of a counterintuitive, and I think that a lot of people were following this book, and the book led them astray.
Yeah, and what kind of conversations are there among parents about, maybe trying to understand what's better for, long-term, physical and social development? Because I've heard, people who are experts say, we're losing physical literacy because children are just doing one sport all the time, and that causes problems.
Well, I'm not. I know it's bad for their bodies because you want to like give certain muscles, and anybody who played hockey knows if you take a month off and skate, there's muscles you're unaware of that you're using. I mean, you can't walk for a couple of days, and especially when you get to be an adult league player like myself, and And so it's good to just use a different set of muscles and physical skills. So, like my son really likes baseball. I noticed and it's a little thing, but he's a wing, and he's got really good at tipping pucks into the net. And I know it's because of bunt practice at baseball. It was a completely different skill that he had learned about hand-eye coordination and using his stick. And I know that playing golf helps him shoot and everything. And it gives him a different way of looking at things. And I think that you're so, like you said, I didn't really get into it when you first said it, but the teaching for the test, that's where it is. Like the hockey for me became a microcosm for the rest of society, because I have an older son who's, trying to get into college, and they have the SAT, and you end up studying just to get a good grade on that test, regardless of what you know about the world or what you're getting from school. And it became the same thing with hockey, which is a lot of hockey, a lot of sports, you can't really measure who's a good player and who isn't. I mean, it's certainly before you've seen them play for 20 or 30 games, you can't. So a lot of these kids, because they're jumping around, they show up. No one's seen them play. Nobody knows a lot about them. So they can only measure the skills that are easy to measure, So basically they measure their inside edge, the radius of their turn, their outside edge, how precise their stop is, how hard their shot is. And so you wind up with the players that are maybe the most skilled players, but none of them are very good hockey players. Now, and I see the same thing in the NFL Combine, and you see the same thing with hockey, which is you got to wait until you play 10 games in a row and you're at a 5-game tournament and it's the 4th game and you're losing. Half the kids have quit. Half the kids are still going as hard as they can. There's no test for that I know of, except watching them. Those kids are your hockey players, and you'll miss them in the tryout. I say this, I was especially aware of this as a Bears fan, okay, because over the years, the NFL Combine became so important, and there's a whole history to the NFL Combine. But it's part of, like, giving a number to everything and putting everything on an algorithm and giving a value to everything. But the fact is, before the NFL Combine was a big deal, I think it was brand new, and a lot of players didn't go, the Bears used their first-round draft pick to pick a quarterback, my favorite quarterback, Jim McMahon, who also played for the Vikings. McMahon is about 6 feet tall, maybe 6'1". He has a mediocre arm. He was always out of shape and overweight. He never amassed huge totals, but all he ever did was win football games. He won 30 games in a row that he started and was all intangibles. Him getting a way to get into the end zone, to winning, to finding a way to score points when the absolute crunch time came. And now with the Combine, the Bears go out and they draft Mitchell Trubisky, who's 6'6", can throw end zone to end zone. Is a great athlete, has the best vertical jump, can run faster than anybody. He's just not a very good football player. And you see that same thing replicated in every sport and on the ice rink. It's all the intangibles. And that's why I always thought the coaches should just pick the teams and leave all the rest out of it.
In terms of analytics, the hockey was probably one of the last of the 4 major North American sports to kind of jump in on it. And the debate, I'd say, is raging full scale. Not really the debate. I think everyone knows that they belong, but people argue over analytics all the time. I want to know how analytics are seeping into minor hockey, as we'd call it, or at your son's level.
Well, what I found, now I had 2 kids who played hockey, and I found that they don't have very thorough analytics. They don't keep very good statistics. Now, the analytics are important in the tryouts, but it's all kept very, very hush-hush. And, like, our organization has these outside evaluators come in for the tryouts. And these outside evaluators came in because the parents complained to the coaches and the parents who pick these teams, and they want somebody that can offer them a little bit of plausible deniability. So when somebody's pissed off that their kid didn't make the team, they could say, hey, it wasn't me, it was those guys. Where are they? I don't know. They went back to wherever outside analytics guys go, you know. And they would be scattered during the tryout throughout the seats, the bleachers, in sort of like air marshals. Like you didn't know who they were, but you can kind of tell they didn't belong. They were like in all dark suits, keeping a lot of notes. And with youth players, you know, there's not that much to measure, so they measure, you know, like I said, the edges and that kind of stuff. And and they would use that to often back up decisions that they already made. And that's maybe the analytics could be even used in some cases in a better way, because I don't know if you ever saw the movie Miracle, you know, the Kurt Russell movie about the Olympic team, but Herb Brooks, according to that movie, shows up for the Olympic tryouts, and he's already got his team. You know, and so there's like should be 15 spots on that team or something, but in fact there's probably just 3 spots that are really actually available. So you're playing, and that's what it's like in these tryouts when you show up at some of these teams. There's just a spot or two. So your kid, I always say to my son, like, you don't have to be as good as these guys. You have to be better. I mean, you have to give them a reason to change their plan around. And as far as in games, the analytics, they don't really keep very good analytics because it's usually a parent with a notebook. They keep goals and assists and maybe secondary assists. And then sometimes they try to keep the plus minus, which is probably the most important. And they often just use it as an excuse to sort of push a kid back that they don't like, to say, look at his plus minus, where, I don't know, plus minus in our league has a lot to do with who else you're on the ice with too. So I just think that it's like you become what you measure, you know. So you play to the thing, but the statistics are just a tool where people see what they want to see. So if you think your kid's great, your kid's great. And it doesn't really matter what the analytics say to a lot of parents. It's like my father has this thing saying, believing is seeing, you know. And if you're looking to get offended, you will get offended. And if you're looking to think your kid's great, your kid will be great in your eyes. So the statistics always come up against that. Now, Canada, I imagine, when they get a little bit older, it becomes more important. The analytics maybe are a little more thorough and a little better, but the analytics are just another tool.
I want to ask you about I want to ask you about travel. And travel is a major factor in minor hockey and a very important theme in this book. And what did you learn, or what was reinforced about what you knew about the demographics and infrastructure and so on in Connecticut as you crisscrossed the state for this for your son's hockey team?
Well, first of all, hockey, when I grew up and now, is not incredibly racially diverse, okay? And that's just the way it is. And maybe that'll change, and that should change. And it's changing slowly. But economically, it's incredibly diverse. And it's very expensive, you know. So my book is just following one season, one team. But within that one team, you have people that are hedge fund guys that are like multi-millionaires. And then, you know, people who are working construction and they're scraping together the money so their kid can play. So that's another thing that puts pressure on the parents, which is, if this is all the money you have, or if you're working 2 jobs so your kid can play this elite hockey, and you're spending all your time driving 4 hours for practice to get to the right program for your kid, and then you go and travel to a tournament and you realize your kid isn't playing, you know, and then you get kind of like, is my kid on the wrong team? Is this good for my kid? Is this bad for my kid? You know, that's some of helicopter parenting too. So what's interesting about my town is we're kind of a hinge town. Like, to the south of us are the very, very rich towns of Fairfield County, Connecticut, which are some of the richest towns in the United States, like Greenwich, Connecticut, New Canaan, Connecticut, Darien, Connecticut. These are the teams we play. And on the other side of us are much more blue-collar towns, like Bridgeport, Connecticut, Danbury. And I always thought we were in the middle. We draw from both sides. So I thought we were at a disadvantage playing the very rich towns because they have a level of coaching and development that we can't afford. And the other teams are like a little bit rougher and grittier, so they're tough in a way that our kids aren't. So we're kind of in the middle. But what's interesting about Connecticut is, and a good reason to play youth hockey in Connecticut, is it's small, so you can basically cross the whole state without, like right this year my son's playing in New York, and New York's huge. So from where we live, if you're going to play in Buffalo, that's an 8-hour drive. That's a flight. But Connecticut, within 4 hours, 3 hours, you can cross the whole state. And you realize that Connecticut is kind of a microcosm because it's got these very rich towns, these very nice towns, and it's got these old, sort of mill towns, like New England towns, that have sort of been hollowed out by what's happened to the economy. So you get every sort of team and every sort of kid, and that part of it's kind of fascinating. And that's why, like with my kid, I always insist that we don't just go in and go out, that we have to stop and eat or do something in one of these places so you get a sense of where you are. And I always try to, people think I'm crazy, but I always like to go sit with the other team's parents just to try to get that vibe kind of and try to see it through their eyes because, these games are very important to people, and I like to understand what's making them so nuts.
Yeah, in the book, too, I believe you write about going, under this bridge and then emerging into, or through this bridge and emerging in a new kind of part of the state, and I thought that was really interesting. I think it was Northford versus Danbury. I'm not if that's what.
Yeah, and you go to. It's funny because all these towns is like New Haven, North Haven, West Haven, and they're all. And people would always say, "Beware the havens," And I was at a game once, and a parent was just screaming at my son, calling him names, without any idea of who he was, that I was his father. And I turned to say something, and another parent grabbed me and said, "Leave it alone, it's the Havens." And it was kind of like the end of the movie Chinatown, where it's like, forget it, Jake, it's Chinatown. Like, what goes on in the Havens we don't want to know about, just leave it alone.
Leave it alone. In terms of costs, which you just talked about, what's the differential from I'm not factoring in inflation, obviously, but just in terms of when you played in the 70s in Deerfield and then how your son came to play, like, what are the, how insane have the costs become in hockey?
Well, I don't know for sure because I didn't care about costs my parents were paying when I was a kid, but I think that we're talking about for a good travel hockey program, at the most it was probably like around $1,000. And the house league program was like $150. And the house league was really, really good. And then as far as equipment goes, the equipment was much cheaper. I mean, it wasn't as good. I mean, a stick was what, $20 or something, Mm-hmm. The sticks are outrageously expensive now. That's a big shock to me. And I had a brother played and older friends who played, so I always was got hand-me-down equipment. And I would play spring league hockey, but then it ended. So it just wasn't. And also when we would go traveling, we had a team bus or van, and we didn't stay in hotels. The other teams we played, the kids on that team's families would host us. So that was another reason that you didn't get crazy with these other kids, because you stayed with their parents in their houses, and we all knew each other, and that was a great way to see different parts of the country. And now there's, so in addition to now, it's like we're talking like maybe, depending on the program, between $5,000 and $30,000. I mean, that's not us, but probably like talking around $10,000 on average for a good thing. And then the skates and sticks are like, some people pay $300 for sticks. I'm sure you guys know this. I don't get that my kid get those sticks. He doesn't need them, and he doesn't have a good enough shot for them anyway. And the great thing about the skates here is you can buy used skates and remold them. I mean, there are ways to sort of not pay as much, but my brother's kids played AAA hockey, which is the highest level here, and he'd be getting on a plane every weekend. So add to that planes, hotels. I mean, it gets to be like, $40,000, $50,000, or as we say here, one semester at an American college.
And I mean that sometimes is the end goal, right? To get your kid into college, maybe on a scholarship. I guess what I was thinking of is just percentage, like your parents' percentage of their income that went to you playing hockey versus the percentage of your income that goes to your son playing hockey. It must just be staggering in terms of a difference.
Here's how I know, because I went to summer camp, for 4 years, I think, when I was a kid, and my parents would bitch so much about how much that camp cost. I think it was like $1,200. So hockey must have been much less than that, because they never said a word about it, and they would never, if something bad happened, they'd go, I spent $1,200 to send you to that camp,
Right.
You better have had a good time.
Right.
So, what are we spending $1,200 for, so it wasn't, and really the house league was, and I played house league too. So I played on the travel team and the house league team, and that was just like, I remember that because I remember having to give them a check. It was like $100, and that was for a lot of games and a lot of ice time.
So ultimately,
and we had far fewer rinks too. There's
Right.
so many rinks now.
Ultimately, what I'm leading to is, I mean, hockey seems it is now pretty much an elitist endeavor. So, what have we lost in filtering out these kind of working class roots? And I thought of this when Walter Gretzky passed away. I think it was last week. The mythology and what's true. He's a telephone. I think he was a lineman for Bell. Very blue collar, and that goes for a lot of the great hockey players that we probably grew up watching and you grew up watching. But I don't know if that's really possible now, unless that parent has a full-scale, absolutely full-scale, I guess, mission to make their kid a hockey player. And I think that ties into gutting the house leagues too, right? I mean, how does how does hockey?
Well, I will.
Go ahead.
I will. I mean, I think that to some degree this has happened in not just hockey. Okay, so I mean, I'll give you an example. Like, I wrote the book about the Bears. The guy who put the Bears defense together was Buddy Ryan, and who was the defensive coordinator for the Chicago Bears. And he had a thing that the tougher the childhood, the better the player. And he said he used to go into the dormitory where they stayed during, they had a huge roster and they were cutting players. And he would watch the players shave and see which ones turned off the water or brushed their teeth between, using it, and which ones let the faucet run. And he said he wanted the guys who turned off the water because that means they grew up with well water and they were poorer and they had a tougher childhood, so they were going to be better football players. And when I would play with Canadians, because I did play with Canadians a lot, when I was a kid and when I was older, I was always amazed. I never thought of Canada's hockey being elite like that, because the Canadians that I met who played came from all different kinds of backgrounds. They were not rich kids, Mm-hmm. They were just middle class, lower middle class, working class, whatever. They were everybody. And I think in America especially, because one of our main hockey centers was in New England, where I now live, and the really good hockey ends up pulling you into boarding school. And the boarding schools are, the most elite. That's where, George Bush goes to boarding school. And those are the kids. John Kerry was a very good boarding school hockey player, I think. So, and then up to the Ivy Leagues. And even where I grew up in the Midwest, it wasn't as elite like that. And a big part of that was these house leagues where, so my older son stopped playing travel hockey, and he still wanted to play. I said, go play house league. There's a house league here. And I thought it was just going to be the same as when I grew up. They didn't even have enough kids to get two teams together. And they had such a wild disparity of talent. So they had some kids who were decent, like my son, decent, and they had some kids who couldn't even skate. So how can you play a hockey game, So basically, when I grew up, like I said, there were parents, one, who didn't have the money, two, who thought it was stupid to travel to a rink when you had a rink locally, and or parents that had 10 kids. Okay, so whatever one got, the other got. So they couldn't afford to have 10 kids playing travel hockey, so they play the house league, which is already, for the 10 kids, it's like $1,000. And so a lot of the best players, best athletes, played hockey, and played house league. And you'd only find out when you get to high school, say, and you'd all get on the same ice, and you're like, where did this kid come from? Oh, he's been playing house league. And so that was a really good way to develop players, and that was parent coached, and the parents were former hockey players who wanted to just teach kids how to play hockey. Plus we had all this time, like I said, playing outdoors just on our own. And we played floor hockey in the gym, and we used to go play hockey in the gym behind the school. They froze the fields. So all that's gone now. And now I think because there's so much less time to play, that the practices are also seeing you have so little ice time that the premium, the cost of the ice goes up, and the ice time, all the time has to be used to develop these certain particular skills. And one of the reasons my son switched teams is because he's on a team now where the coach believes that the drills should basically be disguised as competition, because he just wants to compete. Instead of just being these kind of rote drills where you're just practicing skills, if you could put two kids racing against each other doing those drills, he'll get into it because it becomes a game, So I do think that it's become more elite. And here's the other thing, which is, it's a big business with a lot of money. And the one way that you make money in any business in America and in the world is you basically create stress, even if unintentionally, and then you sell something to alleviate the stress. So basically, our program has 4 teams, 4 levels: AA, A, A1, B. That's a hugely hierarchical system, and then some kids don't make any team. Okay, so basically, for every parent at every level, there's stress. Is their kid going to drop back? Is their kid going to move on? It's just like the same stress as college. So you alleviate that stress by selling private lessons. And everyone's in competition. We're talking about not taking time off or not playing other sports. It's like you're not looking at your kid sometimes. You're looking at what the other parent is doing. And if another parent is having their kid skate an extra 3 hours a week in a private lesson that's $150 an hour, you feel like you have to do it for your kid to keep up. And it becomes like an arms race that just gets more and more and more expensive, and it leaves less room for the player who's just developing at a slightly different rate with a different economic structure.
And now, you're giving me a lot to think about, Rich. I grew up with Wellwater, but my birthday is also January 4th, so I think those two things cancel each other out. It explains why I was the worst hockey player in a family of 3 children. My sister was a goalie, my brother was a forward, so they can argue over who was better. And we're hoping you would offer a reading. This, to me, was the book's like emotional crescendo. Confrontation with Coach Hendricks about your son's playing time.
Yeah. Can you remind me of the page?
Yeah, it's sort of mid 178. Starts with the words, tell me what you want him to do.
Yeah, okay. I would say one thing first, which is because it's funny you talk about yourself and your siblings. Because my older brother taught me to play and played with his friends, I had to learn I became a good hockey player because I had to learn how to get around bigger kids. And I had to learn how to not let anybody touch me because they would kill me. And now here in the United States, I don't know if it's the same in Canada, they don't start checking until bantam. So it's not even that they don't have the checking skills. They don't have the survival skills. You know what I mean? They don't know how to avoid getting hit, which we just learned without even realizing we learned. And so in this little passage I'm reading, it's like, it doesn't matter if you could be a great coach and never played hockey. I'm not being a snob about it. I'd rather have a guy or a woman who was better with kids and had never played hockey than was a great hockey player who couldn't talk to kids. So, all right, so this is my confrontation with one of the parent coaches. He was saying that my kid wasn't listening to his instructions, and he was giving him directions, and he was always out of position and wasn't enacting these very complicated plays he was sending. At this point, my son's 11 years old. Finally, I said, tell me what you want him to do, I said, and I'll make sure he does it. Coach Hendricks grunted, said, fine. Got out a rub-off marker and drew on the plexiglass. We were at the rink. It was more of the same, dots and dashes, lines going every which way. I could make no sense of it. Then I suddenly understood and said, you didn't play hockey growing up. It was like an epiphany. It made sense of everything. No one who'd played the game as a kid would diagram a play this way. It was the sort of drawing done by a person who'd watched a lot of hockey on ESPN. Some of the other odd things Coach Hendricks had said made sense now, too. Like when he told Barry to never slow down in the neutral zone because once you slow down, it's hard to get going. That makes no sense to a 12-year-old, but a lot of sense to a 50-something man who's just taken up adult hockey. Or the time he argued against scheduling 2 games in one day because it's just too damn hard on the body. I must have touched a sensitive spot because he went wild when I said that. So what if I didn't play, he shouted. You think you're better than me because you played when you were a kid? I'm the one giving my time. I'm the one out there with the kids. I'm the one doing the schedule and scouting the competition and figuring out the algorithm. What are you doing? Nothing. Sitting on your ass in the stands bitching like every other know-nothing hockey parent. I've spent hours. I was certified by USA Hockey. Were you certified? I sat through seminars. Did you sit through seminars? I learned about good team hockey. Did you learn about good team hockey? And now what? You want me to quit? Fine, I'll quit. I'll walk away right now. Bobby had gotten quiet. People were staring. I spoke in a whisper. That's not what I meant. I've been caught off guard by his anger. I'd rather have a coach who never played but can teach than an NHL All-Star who can't talk to kids, I said. It's just that watching you draw that play, I realized you hadn't played when you were a kid. And it explains a lot. You can't remember what it was like to be 11 years old out there. A grown-up draws a bunch of arrows and lines, and your head swims, so you just skate away. He stared at me. Don't you see what's happening? I went on. You draw these plays for the kids. They don't understand them but are afraid to tell you. So they pretend to understand and do their best, but it's wrong. And you get mad because you think they're not listening. They are listening. They just don't get it. I don't get it, I said, pointing at the play, which is already fading, and I've been involved with hockey my entire life.
nail on the head. And I was always the type of kid who, got at the end of the line for drills so I could watch someone else, mess it up first.
I always thought that's my biggest. When I watch my son do drills now, I think the main reason I couldn't play today is I don't have a good enough memory. They're like doing 100 different things. I'm like, I don't even know how they know what to do.
Yeah,
like roll over, touch their head, skate to the edge, go backwards. It's like,
And we just had to do that.
Can't remember my phone number sometimes.
Yeah, and obviously you did know about good team hockey from playing it as a kid and the instruction you had. How much does that, when you think of that, when I read that section of the book, I sort of connected it to how you were describing the growth of youth hockey in the States, and maybe having all these parents who a generation ago would have put their sons in football or baseball and are now putting them in hockey, but they don't know hockey.
This guy who didn't play hockey was a football guy, and a lot of people are, because there's been so much fear of football and concussions, and people don't want their kids playing football anymore, but they still want to have them involved in a sport that's physically rigorous and a contact sport. So hockey sort of fits the bill, and basketball is good, but basketball so much depends on size, on height. So now in football, plays are like a big deal. Like, that's football, plays, and stop and start, and stop and start. Hockey is a game of flow, and plays don't really matter that much. And the fact is that, a few basic templates, like positioning and going up and down the ice, but once that, it's flow. And it's opportunities opening up and people making plays and playing together. And, spending times on plays, especially for little kids, if you watch an NHL game, it's not all that different. It's different physically and speed, but it's the same game you're going to see if you go watch Bantams play. They're doing the same basic thing. And they have the same basic goal, which is to create these situations where suddenly the clouds part and there's a shot at the goalie, So to me, this guy was like the equivalent of somebody who there's a bunch of 10-year-olds learning to play football, and he's like, let's start with the flea flicker. You can play your whole entire life all the way up into the NHL and never learn one of those plays. So it was funny because at one point I said to him, look, every one of your plays, which depends on winning the face-off cleanly, which we've never done. So we've got this whole play. He's telling them this whole play, and they go out and they lose the face-off, and now they don't know what to do because they had this play,
Right.
So it's like a Rube Goldberg kind of thing.
Rich, we are closing in on the top of the hour, so there's a lot I wanted to ask you. And thankfully, we got to cover some of this in our clubhouse conversation about like how you coached against Mark Messier and why Leo Moriarty likes Zach Hyman of all hockey players. But we'll save that for people who read the book. I guess you can quickly say why one of the players on this team liked Zach Hyman, because it relates to the nature of our podcast, which is a love of books.
Because Zach Hyman wrote these kids' books, one about a kid who plays hockey who has a stutter.
Yeah.
And some relative of his, knowing he's a hockey fan, gave him this book. So this allowed him to see that you could be a hockey player and be a writer, and loved his stories. And then when you watch Zach Hyman, you realize he's such a gritty player, and he fights so hard that gives you something to do when you're not necessarily, Connor McDavid, but you can find a role just digging along the boards and and getting it going.
He's been red hot lately, Zach Hyman, for the Leafs. So
Yeah.
I want to, I guess I'll close by asking you about some of your other work. And before I get into, what you did and what you are doing with, for example, creating the HBO series Vinyl, I actually forgot to tell you this on the Clubhouse chat the other day. One night I was looking for a bar, I'm going to say 4 years ago, and I went to the Horseshoe Tavern, pretty famous bar on Queen Street in Toronto, and I noticed the signage looked a little different, but I walked right in and I kind of stood by the bar, I always stand, and I looked around and everything seemed to be branded, and then everything said Vinyl, and then I realized that I'd somehow got into the Vinyl launch party, and as I tried to buy a drink, and then it was an open bar, and that gave me away. The bouncer then came up to me and knew I didn't belong there, so he let me finish my drink. But for a moment, I was at I was hobnobbing at the Vinyl launch party in Toronto. So
That's so funny.
That was the longest. It's the longest it took me to drink a beer. I can tell you. I tried to milk it for everything it was worth, because the bouncer said, "Hey, you get to drink this, and then you gotta go."
Yeah, nursed it like you're in grad school.
There you go. I just wanted to know how you became involved with that, and some of the other things you're working on going forward now, because you have such a wide breadth of knowledge and of experience in this industry.
Well, that goes way back, which is I started out early when I was in my early 20s working at Rolling Stone magazine, and I was sent to Toronto to spend the summer sort of hanging out with the Rolling Stones, who were rehearsing for what would be the Voodoo Lounge tour. And I became friendly with Mick Jagger, and I ended up traveling around the road when they went out on tour that summer. I saw them rehearse in a middle school in suburban Toronto. It was like amazing. And just me and them in this gym, and they're playing all their songs. And then right around the same time, or a little later, I'd written a book about Jewish gangsters in Brooklyn. It was my father's bedtime stories for me in the 1930s and 40s and 50s. And Martin Scorsese had someone gave him the book, and he loved the book, and he sort of reached out to me. And then Jagger and Scorsese had always wanted to make a movie together, and the idea was it was going to be like Casino in the movie business. And they both knew me. I was right, and just at the time for Rolling Stone, I'd written a business story about Warner Brothers Music. So they called me in, and I thought about it, and I pitched them an idea, and I ended up kind of becoming one of this threesome at the time. And later on, Terrence Winter was added, and so basically we worked on it for so long. And it was like a 3-hour movie that by the time it was ready to be made, TV was the thing. So they sort of adapted the 3-hour movie into a series, with what I had written becoming the pilot of the series. And it's funny, you told your story about the Vinyl party. You remind me of this. I instantly thought of this another hockey story, which was when I first moved to Connecticut. I started playing adult hockey on Sunday nights, and all these guys went out to get a beer afterwards. I didn't know them really, at this bar in our town, and I went to meet them for a beer afterwards, and I saw two of them, and I sat down, and they looked so uncomfortable, these two guys, and I'm like, "Hey, how's it going, guys?" And they're like, "Good." And they like wouldn't make eye contact with me. It was all weird, and I was like, "What the hell? Did I do something bad on the ice? Did I flash somebody?" And another guy I know came in, he called me and goes, "Hey, Rich, those guys aren't with us. They didn't play hockey." And they were just two random guys sitting at the bar that I had sat down with and started to talk to. So be very careful.
Yeah. Absolutely.
When you walk into the wrong bar.
Yeah, depending on where you are, for sure. And what are you up to next? What's going on right now, now that this book is out?
Well, actually, I'm trying to do more TV stuff. I wrote this, there was this horrible, probable murder where I live. You can look it up. This woman named Jennifer Dulos, who dropped her kids off her son was a hockey kid, and she dropped her kids off. She's in the middle of a bad divorce, at the New Canaan Day School in Connecticut, and she was never seen again. And I wrote a 6-part episodic narrative, true crime narrative about what happened to her in something called Airmail, which is a magazine of Graydon Carter, Canadian, and trying to turn that into a TV show. So that's mostly what I've been working on.
Well, Rich, we'd like to thank you for your time today, and you can just tell people where they can buy this book. I believe you have a website where they can purchase it.
AuthorRichCohen.com, which link you to every other place. And there's always just Amazon or your local. It's in Canada. It has its own different publisher, but Amazon's probably the easiest.
Well, thanks again, Rich. Best of luck going forward with all your projects, and we really enjoyed reading this book, Pee-wee's Confessions of a Hockey Parent.
I'm glad this book got me to meet you guys. I appreciate it.
Absolutely.
Absolutely.
Thanks
Thank
again.
you so much.